All right, good afternoon and welcome to the advisory committee meeting for the marijuana license moratorium and reporting of sex and human trafficking at licensed premises. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend this afternoon's meeting. My name is Nicole Blase, and I am the rules coordinator for the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. A few housekeeping notes before we get started today. Today's meeting is being recorded. Please be aware of whether or not your phone and your computer are muted. Committee members are asked to remain on mute until the introductions portion of today's meeting. Only invited committee members will be a part of today's discussion. Members were selected due to their level of interest or position within the community. If you are not an invited member or proxy, please use the call-in number that was transmitted in the notice for this advisory committee meeting. Please be courteous to other committee members so that we don't have multiple participants speaking at once. You may use the raise hand function in Teams and we will call on you in order. With that in mind, we ask that each of you serve as goodwill ambassadors to the discussion so that you may represent your constituency professionally. Non-committee members will be able to tender comments during the public hearing and during the public comment period. Committee members, please state your first and last name when you make a comment. In the hopes of cultivating a platform for better discussion, we will not be doing a share screen during the rules discussion portion of this RAC. That being said, please be sure you have a copy of the draft rules in front of you, or let us know if you need one sent to you. Today is Tuesday, August 16th at approximately 1 p.m. Many of you are familiar with the rulemaking process, but for those of you who have not yet had the opportunity, or for those listening in, I will begin by saying a few words about rulemaking and the purpose of advisory committee meetings. The purpose of an advisory committee is to increase the public's involvement in the drafting and development of administrative rules. The Oregon legislature, through its enactment of the Administrative Procedures Act, ORS Chapter 183, stresses the critical importance of the public's participation in policy development. Advisory committees are an excellent way to solicit input from internal and external stakeholders who are likely to be impacted by the development or amendment of agency policy and rule. Consequently, advisory committee invitees may include licensees, permittees, industry representatives, OLCC staff, members of law enforcement, local government, the public, local community organizations, small businesses, and other interested stakeholders. The purpose of having all of the members on this committee today is to hear from different parts of the industry and public health and safety partners. The Commission strives to hear from all interested parties. Our role today will be to explain the background and context of these rules and the changes that are being proposed in this package. We will provide facilitation to ensure that all committee members can provide input today. During this afternoon's meeting, we will seek your input on the proposed amendments to the marijuana license moratorium and reporting of sex and human trafficking at licensed premises. Today, staff will explain the proposed language changes to the marijuana license moratorium by amending Oregon Administrative Rules 845-025-1131 and 845-025-1132, and the reporting of sex and human trafficking at licensed premises by adopting Oregon Administrative Rule 845-025-5585. Under Oregon's public meeting law, this meeting is open to the public and members of the public are free to observe our discussion, but may not offer comments. The agency will digitally record this advisory committee meeting and will produce and circulate a record of our discussion. However, because this meeting is intended to promote the open exchange of ideas, we will maintain an informal atmosphere and meeting minutes will record only the topics discussed and the main points made. Approximately 1 week after our meeting, we will post and distribute the meeting's audio. We will now move on to introductions. We will be calling on you to introduce yourself. When introducing yourself, please state your name and the organization you are representing. I will go first. Again, I am Nicole Blase, and I am the Rules Coordinator for the OLCC. And we do have Commissioner Miletus on the call today. So welcome, Commissioner Miletus. Kelly, would you like to start? Kelly Rout?
Nicole, for the record, Kelly Rout, Policy Rules and Public Records Advisor for the OLCC. Thank you all for being here.
Great. Amanda Borup.
Hi, I'm Amanda Borup. I'm a marijuana policy analyst with the OLCC.
Thanks, Amanda. Amanda Metzler.
Amanda Metzler, President and Founder of Farms Inc.
Thank you, Amanda. Tyler Bechtel.
Tyler Bechtel with Oregon State Police, Sergeant in our Drug Enforcement Section.
Great, thank you. Bobby Saberi.
Bobby Saberi, consultant representing Northwest Cannabis Company in Tualatin.
Great, thank you, Bobby. Adam Buell.
Hi, I'm Adam Buell. I'm the Executive Coordinator with the OLCC.
Thanks, Adam. Denise Byram. Oh, you're on mute, Denise.
We'll try that again. So,
Thank you.
I'm Denise Byram. I'm the OLCC licensed marijuana technician.
Thanks, Denise. Stephen Crowley.
Stephen Crowley, Hemp and Processing Specialist at OLCC.
Thanks, Stephen. Eddie Nielsen.
Hi, Eddie Nielsen, General Manager with Orgrotech.
Thank you. Bryant Haley. Okay, we'll come back to Bryant. Jason Hanson.
Good afternoon, everybody. Jason Hanson, Director of Compliance with OLCC.
Thanks, Jason. Julie Payne. Right, we will come back. Kathy Kesey.
Hi, this is Kathy Kizzy. I'm the program coordinator with UNITE, Center for Farmer Advocacy in Medford.
Thank you, Kathy. Looks like, are there any other RAC members on the call that I have not named? Marissa Rodriguez?
Hi, I'm Marissa Rodriguez. I am a wholesale licensee, Nimble Distribution.
Thank you. Ron Kubota?
Hi, I'm Ron Kubota. My company is the Kubota Company. I'm a consultant.
Great. And then I think Rosa Cazares, are you on the call?
Yes, Rosa Cazares with LaMota.
Great. Lindy Petty?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindy Petty, and I'm the Alcohol and Drug Prevention Coordinator for Washington County. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Lindy. And Summer Underwood?
Summer Underwood, co-owner of the Cush Report.
Great, thank you. All right, and again, please raise your hand if I failed to introduce you, but welcome everyone, and thank you all for attending. And now we are ready to move on to our discussion of the proposed rules language for the license moratorium. And Kelly Rout will now describe the changes to the draft.
Okay, before we do that, we do have a few people with their hands raised. Yeah, it looks like Ron Kubota has introduced himself. We have Haley, no last name.
Haley Olson, yeah, retail owner and producer.
Megan Malstetter.
Hi, Megan Wellstatter, Interim Executive Director for the Oregon Cannabis Association and also a producer license.
And Steve Price. Steve, if you're talking, you are muted. And Rhea Miller.
Good afternoon, Rhea Miller, producer licensee.
Okay, and then if you guys could lower your hand, and then just so that, you know, when we do have questions that we know who to call on. Great. Yeah, so just like Nicole said, I am going to do a brief introduction. So what we have today, we have two discrete rule packages that were based on legislation from the 2022 legislative session. One of those was on the license moratorium, and the other one was on reporting human and sex trafficking. Both of these concepts or legislation were effective upon passage. So as a result, the OLCC did need to pass temporary rules in order to implement that legislation. We did that a few months ago. Those rules expire in October. They're good for 6 months. So the purpose of us here today is to go over the temporary rules that we passed as sort of a starting point to see if we need to make any adjustments before these rules become final. And so we will be starting today with the license moratorium. And essentially, this legislation says that the OLCC must inactivate license applications received after January 1st of 2022. The legislation states that the OLCC will process any applications received on or before January 1st, 2022. We do, as Nicole mentioned in the introduction, we do have two rules that were amended as a result of the legislation. The first one is 845-025-1131 regarding application submission deadlines. The amendments to this particular rule were made first to capture the 4 license types that are affected by the moratorium: producer, processor, wholesaler, retailer, and basically states that the first change states that, you know, we've amended it to say that applications received before January 1 will be processed and applications received after that date will be inactivated. Before I get into one question I have about the language, any questions about this particular rule language or the concept, any suggested additions or deletions? Or actually, I'll open up to discussion at this point. And as a reminder, if you could raise your hand, that'd be great. And please state your first name, last name, just for the record. Thank you. And so Tyler, go ahead.
Tyler Bechtel, for the record, with the Oregon State Police, and just curious for background, how many inactivated applications would OLCC be looking at?
I will defer to licensing staff. If you have that information, that would be great. If we have it at this moment.
I don't have it, Kelly, at the moment, but we can get those numbers for you.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it's important because obviously this is a statutory change, so I don't think it changes anything. I was just wondering for discussion purposes.
So one suggested change that OLCC we've discussed amongst ourselves, so I would like to throw this out to the group. Currently, so the legislation does place a sunset date of this moratorium as March 31st of 2024. This particular rule doesn't reference that sunset date. And so one question that we have for the group is what your thoughts are on in subsection 2, stating something like until March 31st, 2024, applications for these license types will be, that were submitted after January 1 will be inactivated. So it essentially puts in a proactive sunset date so that we won't have to amend it when it does, if and when it does sunset. That being said, we have no way of knowing what will happen in March of 2020, in 2024. to whether the moratorium will be extended. There's just no way to know that. So we were just curious if there were any thoughts on adding the proactive sunset date into this rule language. Marissa.
Sorry, Marissa Rodriguez. Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. I do see that the sunset date is in 11/32. Are you proposing to additionally put it in 11/31? Is that?
Yeah, that's what we're, yes, because I did notice earlier that we do have in Rule 1132 in subsection 3, we do state that because it is in the legislation that we won't be changing a location. We won't allow change of locations for the time period between January 1 of this year and March 31st of 2024. So yeah, I mean, one option, and so we do have it there regarding that particular concept. And so we didn't have it in this temporal language for the 1131. We can. It's just sort of a, what are people's thoughts?
I suggest it because they are two different concepts. One's a deadline and one's a change.
Okay. Okay. And of course, if we do add this language, that there will always be an opportunity for public comment after the rec process. So any other thoughts on this particular, on 1131? If not, I can move to 1132. Okay, hearing none. So I've just briefly touched on it, but in Rule 1132, these are the prohibited changes to license applications. And the one change that we made based on the moratorium was, and this is based on legislation, is that people who submitted their application on or before January 1 of 2022, and therefore their application can be processed, can't change their location during the period of this particular set moratorium. So that this rule change essentially reflects that. So it's basically implementing statutory language. Any questions or feedback on this particular rule? All right. Any other, so these are the rules that we're proposing to change. These are really the only rules that were affected by the moratorium. So if there are no other comments on moratorium language, that's pretty much what we have for that particular concept.
Looks like Tyler has a
Tyler,
question.
go ahead, thanks.
You, Tyler Bechtel, for the record, and Kelly, sorry for the late comment here. On this change of location issue for applications, isn't there more rulemaking coming down the pipeline that's going to have a change of location for if we find out it's within 1,000 feet of the school? Does that rulemaking in the future affect this rule at all?
There is, yes, there was legislation about being able to change a location within 1,000 feet of a school. That's coming in our larger bill and technical package. I would think that because that's also legislation, that would not be affected by this particular language, because it is, if we find out that, and it's usually once someone is licensed that we find out that someone's within 1,000 feet of a school, that we will, the legislation allows them to change there's procedures in place to change their location so that they are no longer within 1,000 feet of a school.
So that's going to be for a already licensed location, whereas this is specific to applications. And
that's
they're
my
not going to
understanding.
conflict.
Yeah,
okay.
That's my understanding.
All right, are there any other comments or questions for the license moratorium? Okay, and we can now move our discussion to the proposed rule language for the reporting of sex and human trafficking at licensed premises. And again, Kelly can get us started on that.
And if someone has any thoughts, if any comments come to mind about the moratorium language, I know it was pretty narrow and pretty discreet. we can circle back to that if you've thought of something. But right now I will introduce the human and sex trafficking, again, another piece of legislation that passed in the 2022 session. This was also legislation, or similar legislation was passed in 2021 for our alcohol on premises licensees related to reporting sex trafficking. So this particular legislation looks very similar to the alcohol legislation, with one exception, in that the marijuana legislation references human and sex trafficking. So what we've done, because last year we passed rules related to the alcohol sex trafficking, we ported over that language that had already been developed as a part of that process and added a definition of human trafficking. So this rule looks very similar to the rule that we have in effect for alcohol. Doesn't mean that they can look different at the end of the day. And so it is a brand new rule. It largely tracks the legislation in that a permittee employee or licensee representative at a marijuana premises does need to report sex trafficking or other human trafficking if they have a reasonable belief that that is occurring at the premises. And also that those employees need to report if they have a reasonable belief that a minor is working at the premises in a way that is not allowed under commission rules. We did make an attempt to define terms to better guide people as to what human trafficking and sex trafficking are. And so that is sort of all in it. So we've got definitions and then sort of the two requirements of workers to report if there is a reasonable belief. And so with that, I'll open it up to any comments, suggestions on this particular language. I saw Ron first, and then we'll go with Marissa. Ron, go ahead.
Hi, I just kind of dawned on me as I was looking at this. Is there any way to put any sort of how-to or a form, a phone number, so that in the actual rule, when someone's looking at it, they can actually use that to show an employee or anybody else, oh, it says here we have to report, and then they have to go look up your number, or I don't know.
Oh, no, thank you. That actually was a good reminder about sort of the reporting process. We don't usually put those specific instructions in rule, but when we do pass final rules, like our goal is to have these passed in October for final action. At that point, what we usually do is send out communications about where people can report if they do have these concerns. We already have on our website a reporting tool for our alcohol sex trafficking, and a reporting tool for the marijuana trafficking is in process. We do have a work group at the agency that's working on getting that up to date. Currently, I think our general complaint form would work, but we do have on our website a web page that talks about trafficking, information that I think we've received from DOJ, as well as a reporting tool, and we'll update that with marijuana information as well. And I see we have Lindy has her hand raised.
Hi, everyone. Lindy Petty for the record. The one thing that felt missing from this was, and it's kind of in line with Ron's comment, is there a way we can include this in the training process to get your marijuana worker permit? It seems like there's going to be a communications plan of some sort, but that seems like maybe a good pathway to ensure that everybody who's going to be getting a new permit will have this information so that they know what's expected of them.
Route with OLCC, I realize I have been forgetting to introduce myself. I'm not following our own instructions. So that's a very good suggestion. I think, although some compliance staff could correct me if I'm wrong, we may have added this to the curriculum for our alcohol server education, and it does make sense to potentially add this to our marijuana education. And it looks like Jason, you've got your hand raised, so probably speak to this, and then we'll go to Marissa.
Yeah, great question. For the record, Jason Hanson, Director of Compliance with OLCC. That is accurate. Kelly's correct. On the alcohol side, we included some sex trafficking education around for service permittees. This is an ongoing process. We do have an internal task force work group to address human trafficking as a whole. So we are constantly evolving in how we are addressing the requirements of legislation, both for the alcohol and marijuana industries. Long-term goal, we'll be working with our DOJ partners and other law enforcement partners and subject matter experts to develop more engaged training for the industry, for people who might be around this, both on the marijuana side as well as the alcohol side. But great suggestion for marijuana worker permits, and it is the same path that we'd like to take as we have with the alcohol side. And I put in the chat a link that includes where you submit complaints for businesses in general for OLCC. On there is a link to report sex trafficking. Like Kelly mentioned, the goal is to update this for labor trafficking as we get rules finalized so that we don't have to overhaul something that is in place for a short time. This may look very different. We would like to have this more streamlined for human trafficking in general, because we realize some people aren't quite sure what they're looking at. And so we'd want to make this as user-friendly, as easy as possible to get us the information so we can do our part. So just this will continue to evolve on our website as well.
Marissa, and then Tyler.
Hi, Marissa Rodriguez. Thank you. One of the things on my list was about getting the word out also, and I believe that you have contact information for all current permittees because they've created a login and given you their email address. I would suggest maybe creating some sort of a bulletin and sending it out to everyone. Not everyone signed up for the emails, and not everyone who has a permit has a job yet. And I'm wondering also about the definition of sex trafficking, and that it references the purpose of commercial, quote unquote, commercial sex. And that's a pretty narrow definition of sex trafficking, but I don't know that that's super relevant to this. Not sure about that. I just wanted to say that. I'm not sure about the word commercial. Tyler might have actually something more deliberate and thoughtful to say about that than I do. And then another thing that has crossed my mind is this: we're requiring employees to do this, but I think that we all know that when it's anonymous, we're going to get more response, right? If you can report something anonymously. And if that could be, I'm not sure how that could be worked out, but if we're requiring someone to report something, then they need some sort of a receipt or proof that they've reported it, but they're more likely to report it if they're not identified. And I don't want to discourage anyone from reporting something for fear of retribution themselves.
Tyler, one question for Jason. You might be prepped to answer this. Do we have an ability to file that form anonymously?
Yes, for the record, this is Jason Hanson, Director of Compliance with OLCC. The very first, when you click on the sex trafficking submission form for alcohol, the very first question is, do you want to remain anonymous or not? And so that will, that will lead you into the next question based on what you choose there. Intention is the same for marijuana.
Great, fantastic. And then in particular to speak to the way of communicating to all permittees is to maybe give people a real path of like who to call in law enforcement. Are there better organizations within law enforcement to reach out to regarding these kinds of particular issues? I think everybody thinks call the police and it's 911, and that may not be really the right path for this. That's all.
Tyler, go ahead. And then Kathy.
So along the line, Tyler Bechtel for the record with the state police, along the lines of Marissa's train of thought with the definition for sex trafficking, I was kind of looking at the definition of human trafficking, and I can see where you kind of have mirrored language and statutes for both of those things. And so I think maybe to answer your question, Marissa, it kind of comes from a statute for trafficking in persons, that Commercial Sex Act language. But what I see missing in the human trafficking, and so now we're talking about the other trafficking, the labor trafficking, there's a word missing that that is in statute that is entices, and how when I'm working these cases and when they're elusive, they're extremely hard to prove. But what we're looking for is force, fraud, or coercion, right? And so that entices factor is that force, that fraud, or that coercion. And I can think of, again, we haven't been able to prove these. They're extremely difficult to prove. But I can think of cases where intimidation was that factor, that enticement. And so I really kind of would like to see that put back in under subsection B, the recruitment enticement. And I'm not sure if that was left out intentionally and if there's a reason for that, or if it could get thrown back in.
Tyler, Kelly Rett with OLCC. I suspect I drafted this language and I probably just didn't see that word. So it was not intentional. So it may have just been an oversight. So I'll take a look at the language. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, so if you're taking it from section 1 of ORS 163266, it's going to say a person commits the crime of trafficking in persons as the person knowingly recruits, entices, harbors, transports. That enticement, we think of that as a carrot on a stick, but it could also be intimidation. And so I think it's important to throw that back in there. It could be intimidation, threatening somebody with going to the government because of your legal status. It could be all kinds of different enticements that are negative. So.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Kathy and then Bobby.
This is Kathy Kizzy with Unite in Medford. Mike, I have a concern about how accessible will this complaint, ability to file complaints be in other languages? Because as we know, many of the workers in these fields are not English speaking and may not have access where they are. And during what time period will they be required to report? Do they have to do it immediately? Do they have to, is there any language like that in the bills or in the laws?
This is Kelly from OLCC. I'm not sure that the legislation states a time frame. I think it's really just, I'll have to take another look at it as far as time frame, but I think the intent here is to get people reporting, not necessarily like immediately, but I think just to sort of encourage reporting if there's a reasonable belief that trafficking is going on. But I will defer to Jason or any other OLCC staff about filing complaints in another language. Not sure if that's our internal work group is working on that or not.
Yeah, for the record, this is Jason Hanson, OLCC Director of Compliance. Currently, it is only in English online for sex trafficking, but it is a great suggestion, and it is something that I will be sure is on our to-do list to include this opportunity in Spanish, or at least provide access. We do work with a language line, a company to do interpreting services for us. So we will, one way or another, make sure that access is available to that.
This is Kathy again with Unite. I'm just not only Spanish, but there's a lot of other Asian languages and other languages that are also involved in these big marijuana grows. So if you could pick like top 7 languages that's common, and I would follow like OHA's lead on some of these, because they already have a lot of these materials developed, and they have like the top 11 languages I believe that are spoken in the state, especially with immigrant populations. So I think that might be helpful as a guide.
Very good, thank you.
Bobby, go ahead.
Yeah, a little less to do with the language, I guess. This is Bobby representing Northwest Cannabis Company. So consequences, if somebody doesn't report, if somebody is approached by OLCC and asked, are they under different requirements than different citizen to answer those questions? How, are they held liable after the fact if it's shown that they know? And then how does that investigation work to verify people are reporting after you find a situation has occurred?
On this, Jason, you know, the language in our alcohol law, this is Kelly from OLCC, the language in our alcohol laws, you know, doesn't address sort of compliance on the back end. There are a lot of other types of sort of mandatory reporters, you know, child abuse reporting and all this. It's really difficult to know, for like us to know that someone knows. So that, you know, I don't know that that's a high enforcement priority, to be like, you knew, but I don't know if Jason has any thoughts on sort of compliance plans in the future. But I think the goal is to just try and get people to report if they do have a reasonable belief that it's occurring.
And for my purpose is when I'm training lots of budtenders and bringing people on board and going over compliance and standard operating procedures for salespeople and people that, you know, are in the industry, that, you know, the stick is sometimes what motivates them to report versus, you know, getting involved as a good Samaritan. So are they in jeopardy of losing their license, you know, their ability to serve or their license? Something that really, if they are more self-centered, only thinking about themselves, knowing what might occur to them might help motivate the bottom 80%.
Thanks, Bobby. This is Kelly from OLCC. I will state that the legislation does state that an employer or worker making a report under the section in good faith is immune from any criminal or civil liability for making the report. I think that probably gets to part of your question. We didn't put that in the rule because we don't, you know, engage in criminal or civil liability. That's not something that OLCC would be seeking, but to the extent that someone did make a report in good faith, that they would be immune from any sort of criminal or civil action.
Okay. That's all I got. Thank you.
This has been a really good conversation about the language as well as the actual reporting. Any other feedback on this particular rule concept? Lindy, go ahead.
Lindy Petty here for the record. I'm wondering, and I'm new to this process, so I don't know if this is the right place for this, but I'm wondering if including language about ensuring the reporting form is accessible to other languages. It just seems like that would kind of ensure that we make, you know, we're making sure that we have the reporting form available in however many languages are identified as needed.
With OLCC. Thank you for the suggestion, Lindy. Usually our rule language is sort of creating the expectations for our licensees and permittees as opposed to the expectations on behalf of the agency. And we usually implement what is mandated by statute, but that's definitely, like Jason mentioned, it's definitely something that they will be looking into to implement, but it's not usually something we'd put in rule, but just because it's not, it wouldn't be a requirement for and, you know, our stakeholders, but more of sort of an internal policy decision. But I do appreciate the feedback for sure. And Eddie.
Yeah, Eddie Nielsen with Orgrotech. Just my experience with self-reporting human trafficking from another industry that I worked in for a long time. It was the biggest challenge that we ran across was access for people to report. You know, everybody has a phone these days almost, but not everybody really knows how to use it. So the hotline and you know, language about requirements for posting inside in multiple languages inside facilities, I think is definitely something that we should look at. and consider. Again, my experience with large immigrant workforces has been the access. So as long as we can, kind of remember that, that would be very helpful.
Jason?
Thanks, Kelly. For the record, Jason Hanson, OLCC, and thank you. I believe it was Eddie. Great suggestion. I would just want to reiterate, we will take a report of human trafficking, regardless of type, through any avenue that anybody reaches out to us. You are not, it is our goal to create a organized system to report these things so that we can capture as much as possible in a consistent way. But, phone numbers, offices, any inspector, anybody with OLCC can receive this information through any way you might access us, and it will get through to the proper division. So we like to say on the front end, this is where to best report it. We create the systems in place to help us be as efficient and organized as possible to do that, but it doesn't stop people from utilizing telephone, mail, in any way you might communicate. So I just want to reiterate that here, and something that we can help in our guides, in our education bulletins that we do as well to remind people.
Thank you.
On this rule, or Bobby, go ahead.
Yeah, so making my original question a little more pointed to the language, when it goes over to the handler's cards, can you add language to the effect that, if you do report, you will avoid prosecution? I know when people read that, in reality, that means a lot to them to follow through. I don't know if there's any way something like that could be slipped in.
Kelly Rapp from OLCC. Thank you, Bobby. We can definitely take a look at that. I mean, it certainly is not outside the realm of possibility to port over the statutory language into the rule language. We'll definitely take that under consideration. Okay, if there aren't any other comments on this language or the moratorium language, I will kick it back over to Nicole to talk about the fiscal impact statement portion of this. And we do have two separate concepts, so we might be getting feedback on both of those, but I'll kick it over to Nicole.
Great, thank you, Kelly. Nicole Blasse with the OLCC. At this time, we will move on to the fiscal impact statement and public health and safety questionnaire. I will collect general feedback from the group regarding the possible fiscal impacts of this package. But for those wishing to provide additional feedback, please complete the statement that you all should have received via email for both packages and return it to us no later than Friday, August 19th by emailing it to olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov. So at this time, is there any feedback on the possible fiscal impacts for the license moratorium that the committee members would like to tell us about? Any comments or questions on the fiscal impact statement? Okay, and then the fiscal impact statement for the reporting of sex and human trafficking. Is there any feedback on these changes that committee members would like to tell us about? Last call for feedback on the fiscal impact statements. All right, thank you. If there, oh, sorry, did someone raise their hand? Oh, no, okay, sorry about that. If there is any additional information you would like to contribute, please complete the form that we provided and return it to us by August 19th. And it looks like that is our conclusion. On behalf of the OLCC, I want to thank our panelists today for providing their expertise on these issues. A notice of public hearing will be issued in the coming months, which will allow for interested parties to provide testimony or submit written comments. For more information, or if you have any questions, comments, or concerns after this visit, please visit our website or email olcc.rulemaking@oregon.gov. And that concludes our meeting today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your afternoon. Bye, everyone.